Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest Centre for Global Higher Education webinar. And it's a very warm welcome from me as David Mills, Director, and our two speakers today, Professor Sarah Hayes from Bath Spa and Professor Michael Jopling, University of Brighton. We've just been discussing this project, which is funded by one of our science research councils in the UK. And it's very much thinking about community engagement, thinking about partnerships and inclusion. And it'll be a delight to hear about their project, which I think some which was carried out during COVID, and to revisit some of that. Just before I hand over, please do remember that, as always, we will record this, so you can always watch and find it on our website, Research CGHE. And also, please do, I suggest you keep yourself muted. And you no need to have your video on during the presentation, but afterwards, if you do put it on, then you can ask a question. Do ask a question in the chat, and I'll ask you to come forward and engage with Sarah and Michael. And with that, and no further ado, I shall stop sharing and invite Sarah to share her screen. And look forward to this very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So we'll just see if we can bring the slides back. Right, that's good. They haven't disappeared yet. So if we can just, they look a little bit strange there. How do we make that a little bit bigger? And
doing the slideshow. And
yeah, so make it look a bit more sensible, and then wonderful. Does that look okay?
That's perfect.
Great. Okay, well, thanks again for inviting us. We were really looking forward to coming along, myself and Michael, to talk about post-digital inclusion partnerships, as we've called this talk. We kind of use this title really because we've been working in partnership projects, but this area of post-digital sometimes needs just a little bit of explanation as to where we're coming from. So just to say that we have set it within this context really to acknowledge that people, wherever they are based in the world, are now increasingly not really in a world that you can call purely physical. It's intermingled with digital technology and media. So it doesn't sit aside really or separately from what is digital and what is perhaps a natural human or social life. And this, of course, has implications for how we experience things in the different locations that we're in. And, you know, something that I have written about in relation to positionality, post-digital positionalities of people. And given the very many data and digital inequities that now exist in communities and that were highlighted through the COVID-19 pandemic, we would say that this is fairly important to acknowledge. So that's just our little bit of opening angle on post-digital. Feel free to ask us more about that a little bit later, or any aspects of things that we're talking about. Now, we've said here that changing the knowledge exchange, kind of the pictures on of people are blocking out my slide a little bit, but changing the knowledge exchange record in higher education. And you will get used to us, but we will keep referring to a few music analogies as we go a little bit. It's something we tend to do in relation to some of these activities. So in relation to this one, the Ivory Tower, Otis Williams and his charms were probably not singing about universities back in 1956, I believe, when they cut this record. But this reference to an ivory tower does tend to continue in relation to higher education and how sometimes people experience universities when they're not actually based in universities. They're out in communities around and potentially researching through different locations. So this was a phrase, this ivory tower phrase was actually used by some participants with us in April when we worked with some Croatian citizen researchers. And we'll come back to talking about that a little bit later. But we do have this tendency to, if we're based in universities, look outwards a little bit and think about who can partner with us on a bid, or maybe on a paper, or perhaps might gather data on our behalf. And then all of this we'll place under this banner of knowledge exchange, but it may or not always be that fair an exchange. So I suppose when we say we're thinking about changing the record as such, we're trying to look at the perspectives of some of our partners in different sectors out in the community and thinking, where would they like to be more actively involved? How does knowledge exchange look from their point of view? And unfortunately, sometimes the language that we use doesn't really help at all, because we have this problem of calling people non-academic partners, which is actually, not the most respectful way to refer to people who may well have had academic lives before they worked in other contexts. So just because somebody isn't based in higher education, we probably shouldn't be considering them as non-academic. So just to continue these music analogies a little, give you a little bit more background music here on projects that David was mentioning just as we opened this session. So we had some engineering and physical sciences research council funding for 2 projects, which really quite a small amount of funding, but they've enabled us to explore during that time when everybody was online during COVID, much more of a dialogue with different sectors on digital exclusion, digital skills, and in particular people's experiences of disadvantages in and around data, whether that's data being collected on them, surveillance, or any other kind of angles that people told us about data interaction. So we were building this sort of cross-sector dialogue through these 2 events, and we were actually exploring some of the questions that are mentioned here at the top about how much agency do any of us have about data that's collected on us, or even data that we produce. How legible are our interactions with data? And also, can we negotiate those? Should we in fact try to resist data interactions, and can we even do that? Can people who may be in quite disadvantaged situations do that? So the work from this first project led to a policy briefing, and then we actually had this extra bit of funding. We were delighted to be able to take the music, so to speak, from the first project into this second one. So when we talk about developing our playlist here, what we actually did with the second project, which was based on human data interaction theory, was we were asking many of the same people who had spoken at our first events, could they come and potentially write with us, maybe write together with each other, co-author, or write individually for a chapter for a book on human data interaction, disadvantage and skills in the community, and how we enable cross-sector environments and inclusion. So we had a really good response again to this, and we've got a picture here of Dr. Arti Manohar, who is sharing the co-authored chapter that she wrote over LinkedIn there. And she wrote a chapter that was called Inclusive Privacy Control for Smart Health Apps. And we had around 15 chapters altogether, and then, brought them all together really under these different sections of agency, negotiability, legibility, and also resistance. And so at this point, I'm going to move the next slide on and ask Michael to comment a little bit about our editing process and the sort of co-publication activities that maybe we would say have strengthened experiences of knowledge exchange. So just move this on a bit for you, Michael.
Thanks for that. So the 2 projects came together in this book that Sarah and I edited with a couple of other colleagues. This just gives you the 15 chapters. This gives you, I think it's 11, which you couldn't fit more on the slide really.
it gives you a feel for the range of individuals and kind of organizations involved, and also the range of foci that they had, from the one at the top from Wolverhampton Council having a very much a local authority kind of perspective, to kind of social enterprises, and then partnerships, the kind of partnerships that Sarah mentioned already in terms of academics working with people who aren't based in universities that we're not going to call non-academics. So yeah, I think you can have a look at the titles for yourselves, but probably move on to the moving on to the next slide thing, please.
Will do.
So, and this is a little bit some kind of summarizing points about the process. We've used the word demystified because we did try to demystify the process of kind of academic writing, academic publishing for people involved, because they were either wary of it or didn't know anything about it, the people based elsewhere than in universities, because we wanted a range of perspectives. That was the point of the project, that was the point of the funding, and also bringing together not just theory and practice in terms of, you know, people in universities doing theory and people elsewhere doing practice, but kind of problematizing those terms, because obviously, you know, practice involves theory as well, and some of the people creating knowledge and theory around these processes are very much involved in practice. So we were kind of trying to undo some of those binaries. And there was, in terms of control, we as the editors, I suppose, and those driving the project, we had this kind of balance between maintaining control and letting go of it, which is always a challenge, I think. So the way we tried to do that was by using as it says, a highly iterative process. So it was very open. The invitation to take part initially in the dialogues that we had that were all online because it was during the pandemic. And then it was open for people if they wanted to write something, wanted to submit a chapter idea. It didn't have to be very formulated or very, it didn't have to be a kind of formal abstract. And then we offered tailored support and feedback depending on what people needed, really. So that varied quite a lot. Some people went off and wrote pretty much because they're used to doing that. Other people came back with quite small kind of summaries that then we had the challenge of trying to work with them. But that was part of the process. It is trying to encourage people who don't get these opportunities to take them. And then we had to kind of, through the normal kind of feedback and review process, that we kind of help people to particularly to reflect on and include the human data interaction framework that we're basing on, because obviously particularly people based, say, in third sector or local authority context weren't used to kind of bringing in an external kind of idea of theory and applying that to the work. So that was what we did. And then there was, you know, iterative, there was more feedback, there were more what we've called here, you know, these metaphors of revision and remixes that sound good when you think about them, but I'm kind of thinking how that works. But there's that article there at the bottom in Postdigital Science and Education it was kind of based on an interview that we did, kind of talking through the process. So if you're interested in that, there's more process related thinking and discussion there. Next one, I think. And when this kind of came out, I suppose just before and around the time that we were interviewed about the book, because we were thinking of it as a kind of compilation or a music compilation or a mixtapes, in that there were more, partly because there were more iterations, as I've just said. So people's views were presented, you know, we questioned them, they questioned them themselves. We edited, which was a bit more hands-on than you would ordinarily expect in kind of academic writing and editing, reviewing, remixing and refining. But also, I suppose the thing is that we were kind of more as editors, more of curators, the kind of curating you do in some of those music compilations that are shown there at the bottom. And it seemed, I mean, I took this quote from Al Wakil, if that's how you say it, of a greatest hits LP consisting entirely of new songs, which I quite like. He was talking about Saint Etienne, their last album, I think. But this idea that you can actually, you kind of, in a book of this kind, you're reflecting what we already know, but bringing it together in different ways to create kind of different forms of knowledge, like you create different forms of music. The next one, I think, that's enough on mixtapes. And then this is where the bit at the top gets in the way. What would we do it again? Lessons learned, that kind of thing. I think we would. What we probably did a little bit is we underestimated how much editorial work was involved, although it was quite rewarding and we learned quite a lot from it. So supporting people and colleagues who aren't used to writing requires more support, requires different kind of support, more flexibility. Yes, as it says there, a lot of hidden labor. What we found is that the people writing who were external academia were actually less precious about support than we expected. They were really open to feedback, rewriting, revising, that kind of thing. Whereas, as this may surprise you, it may not, the academic writers were much more precious about the support. So once you get into this slightly different process of more hands-on editing, you kind of do it for everyone. And some people kind of kick back a little bit about that. So that's interesting. But we got there in the end. So we thought for this kind of project where you're bringing in people who aren't used to writing in this way, it's worth thinking about having an additional support layer, a kind of pre-writing.
Sending the rest in for you, Michael, there to speak to.
Yeah, it's slightly disconcerting when you don't know when it's going to.
Yes, exactly.
So a bit of kind of additional support layer before, so that might have we might have got at and to understand better some of the preconceptions, kind of rehearsal like, so more peer support, and then mixing things up, so allowing people maybe to do some of those cross collaborations which were a feature of the book. We maybe could have done more of that. There's obviously reflecting the way that networks build up, academic networks and other networks, so giving people opportunity to work together globally, across sectors, across disciplines, that kind of thing, and then increasing the opportunities to connect writing together across these areas. So we had people from HE, from further education, from schools, different disciplines, different countries, and maybe, I suppose, in an ideal world, it would have been good maybe having had those online dialogues at the beginning, to have an online dialogue at the end. You know, you'd like that to then feed into the book, but you're up against deadlines and publishers' deadlines and all of those kind of things. So it's difficult to achieve all of these things. Over to you, Sarah, I think.
Oh, yes, I think this is me. Well, yes, actually, that's a really good thought if we had done something like that at the end. So if we're brave enough to do it again, that can be the thing that we do after that. But yeah, so just as Michael has been discussing, I think we would say we learned a lot as editors. We weren't new to editing, but we learned a lot through working with such a diversity of authors and different people's contexts. But you can't underestimate that it is a lot of iterative work, really. One of the things that we found afterwards is that we've inadvertently connected with, in the UK, we tend to have so many of these different frameworks to work to in universities, one of which is the knowledge exchange framework, the KEF metric. And we've inadvertently connected with this idea of co-authorship with non-academic partners, which again uses precisely the language that we've been saying is not the most helpful, but is in fact you know, a sort of metric that people are expected to work to. And I think that raises quite an interesting question if we go back to data about, I mean, the KEF in particular collects a lot through data from universities, but then what's in that data and how are people represented from outside of universities in that data? If we're going to continue to refer to people as non-academic partners, it's not that helpful. So it might be an area that, you know, to explore in more detail, we could, you know, could reconsider really how, you know, how that actually works in practice as a metric for knowledge exchange. And that would just refer to David Kernahan's article there on the wonky, if it's of interest to people, and also to, I can't see for the images of us, but I think it's the Forum on Information and Democracy. I attended an event of theirs recently, and that's an extremely interesting worldwide forum on how we're using data and information. But from our point of view, I think we would say this connection with our cross-sector partners was much more organic than seeing them as somebody detached in a metric. So certainly didn't think of them as non-academic partners at all. But what this has actually led to now is our interest really in this next project that we wanted to share with you, which is much more about exploring the research that is happening outside of universities and looking in fact at citizen research, the identities of citizen researchers, and more interested in perhaps how they are working on interdisciplinary cross-sector areas rather than simply in either the sciences or the humanities. So to say a little bit more about that one now, you can see that there's a group of us involved. Obviously, Michael and I are there, but Professor Petar Jandrić is at Zagreb University of Applied Sciences in Croatia, and then Cheryl Brown and Sarah Talbot at University of Canterbury in New Zealand. And we started to become interested in this area, first of all, as citizen science. But then we moved into thinking of it more broadly, as we'll explain a bit further. So I think if we think about this whole idea of even the word research, often people will immediately associate that with universities. They'll associate it with labs and journal articles. And again, in the UK, another framework, the Research Excellence Framework. But if we think about that, many of the components that get submitted to such frameworks are also coming from many parts of that are from people who are not based in universities. They've been contributing in different ways. They might be our research participants, they might be community or international partners, or indeed co-authors. So we're thinking a little bit more broadly here about some of the world's challenges, and some of them that don't sit at all and neatly under a discipline or sector, ready to submit, say, into a ref submission. So in terms of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of pressing global sustainability or equity issues, we're thinking of these as post-digital challenges because they are cutting across both digital and physical boundaries often, and they're not fitting within one discipline or sector. So each of us had this interest in the ideas of, sort of widening out what do we mean by citizen research, and why, in fact, does citizen science and citizen humanities as such seem to operate as separate fields of research in what we're referring to as post-digital society. So again, back to this idea of language just a little bit, because we tend to be sort of calling people citizen scientists, but are they, and would they even refer to themselves as such, or would people in the humanities call themselves citizen humanities researchers or digital humanities researchers? So we wondered how people might identify their own roles in this situation, and just move this on to the next slide. Ask Michael to step in now to say a little bit more about how we progress with this.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sarah. So what we did, what you do as academics, we published a collective paper, because partly, well, those of us involved, some of I had very little knowledge of what citizen science or citizen research was beforehand. Some of the other authors here had more of an understanding. So it was partly to map the field, to understand what this thing was for us, but also as a kind of precursor for calls for papers that we put out, which were based, both the mapping the field paper and the kind of wider calls were based on these three questions. What is post-digital citizen science? Is there a kind of form of citizen science? And we kind of, although it's not there in the title, we did, as Sarah said, broaden out the focus for citizen science and humanities, and kind of social science fitting in there in some way, in the way that social science does. Who or what getting away from kind of focus on us as individuals or as humans even, is the post-digital citizen scientist. We wanted to know what, as Sarah said, what do people describe themselves as? What do they see themselves as? How do they see their link in to the kind of wider scientific community based in universities or not? And then how to conduct citizen science post-digitally, so what that might mean, which meant to a certain extent understanding how citizen science works, and then seeing, well, actually, has it have different implications, repercussions, or meanings in a post-digital context? And then the next one, I think. So the next paper that came out of this, which was published quite recently, was what we called a theoretical kaleidoscope. So basically, we had an open call for people to write short pieces. The guidance was 500 words, but these were mainly academics, so they couldn't keep to 500 words, but we got them down towards that. That's an interesting challenge. And it ended up with 19 authors, that you see there, from across the world. And the kind of the task was for people to use theories, any kind of theoretical perspective they wanted to look at, to examine, to critique, to think about citizen science and humanities and social sciences, really, how that looks in post-digital contexts and from post-digital perspectives. So in that third bullet point, you can see there are perspectives from indigenous and local knowledge, which from researchers based largely in New Zealand. Technology, there was a lot from kind of technological perspectives, including AI, as you'd imagine, but also other perspectives. And then particularly working with children and young people as citizen researchers, how children and young people, also people with disabilities, can be involved in research as citizen researchers. So it's kind of part of what we would say in both kind of post-digital research community, but also in citizen research. The work is focused on and founded on collaboration, dialogue, co-creation, working together. And as part of that, it challenges some of the approaches, perspectives, ways of working that we have in what we call traditional academic research. And then there's the bold point at the bottom is worth emphasizing, that the transformations that we are calling post-digital, the kind of blurring and undoing of boundaries that Sarah talked about at the beginning, that we're seeing, in all societies at the moment, how are changing things. So it's changing how citizen science works, how citizen humanities and social science works, and opening up the opportunities for that to make a contribution. I think partly because data, people have more access to data and can share data more easily, but also that also creates challenges. So as always, there are challenges and there are opportunities in all of this, but some of those challenges are played out in this paper. I'll stop on that bit there.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, following the kaleidoscope of perspectives that Michael's just been talking about, and sort of thinking about things quite maybe a bit more theoretically, but getting people's input into articles, we decided that we would do something a bit more practical and actually get out there to speak to some citizen researchers. And so you see some pictures here from this event, running of a pilot study with an extremely diverse group in the fabulous city of Zagreb. And we chose Zagreb because we have Petar Jandrić working there and able to bring a number of people together for us to meet with there. We'd like to actually do some further meetings like this, and so have applied for funding at the moment, and will continue to apply for funding to follow up this work. But Petar, he brought together these, the very diverse group, as you can see listed on the side here, and they had no idea themselves as to why we would actually want to bring them together. They might even have had some suspicions, to be honest, wondering why we'd stepped out of the ivory tower, if you like, to engage in the meeting in the first place. Petter didn't actually know these participants, but he was looking for people that were from different disciplines and different sectors, and finding people to bring together for this event for us. And so when we actually got everybody together on the Friday evening, we had a dinner first of all, and obviously with some language barriers because people were from Croatia and Bosnia and had travelled to be with us on the Saturday. So on the Friday night, we had a dinner to break the ice a little bit. But then, as you can see in the picture at the bottom here, that was us gathered for the afternoon the next day, well, for the morning as well, actually. We had some lunch in between. And what we did is we declared from the outset that we were all participants in the same discussion or the same post-digital dialogue about what citizen research means. There were 3 of us there from Bath Spa University, and the collection of participants, and we all signed ethical consent forms saying that, you know, that levels the playing field here. You know, we're not trying to do a study on the people who'd gathered. We're trying to have a sharing of ideas on this and learn more about the challenges that everybody's facing when they're working across sectors, as we are with research, whether you're based in universities or elsewhere. So this list of people, you can see there's scientists, there's artists, some people would call themselves activists, some were curators in museums, meteorologists, we had people from libraries, a photographer, pilot, a person who lived on a lighthouse, a library, 2 library researchers, and an urban gardener. And again, you know, they really were interested in each other as well as us, because they hadn't met before either. And so, you know, we'd actually got a bit of ice breaking to do, and then to get to a few basic research questions that we could see, you know, what we all made of these. So we were looking at things like, where do we place our activities as researchers, as both human and technological? Do we sit ourselves in the humanities, the sciences, or social sciences? You know, what would we describe about ourselves as researchers? And how partial is there an opportunity, for example, for some of the people here to participate in all aspects of a research cycle, or what we might call a traditional research project? Because often people are collecting data, but they're not necessarily seeing the original design of a research project. They may not have been part of the original bid, or later down the line, do they get to analyse any of that, or work with people on the findings and discussions and to co-publish? So I guess we could say that this did give us a few insights, and I'll just move this slide on to share those. So certainly how intermingled physical and digital citizen research is, that was one of the things that really came out of this. And these participants said that they've all agreed unanimously that science in the service of humanity is really important if technology is to actually be a social good across the globe. And they also agreed that, you know, I hope all of us would think this to some extent, although it's quite hard to do, that work and research should also be fun, that you should be enjoying yourself, that you work to enjoy and not, you know, if you're not enjoying it, probably some of them had left universities because they weren't actually enjoying necessarily being in that context. So it also revealed these different cross-cultural and cross-sector challenges. It revealed a lot of power dynamics in terms of knowledge exchange relationships. Some of them felt that there was a real lack of equity with people in universities. They couldn't necessarily apply for funding in their own right, or they didn't have an affiliation to an institution. Therefore, it made it very hard for them to access literature or, you know, for publications, etc. And a number of them said that really the ivory tower was just simply too slow in terms of getting results out there from their activities. So many of them had found alternative ways to bring the message out of what they had found in terms of their own research, rather than using slow academic publication routes. And many of them felt rather excluded from that too. So just really in summary, we're bringing this whole post-digital dialogue from this group together in terms of a co-authored paper, very much in the vein of the one that Michael was describing about the kaleidoscope. We have accounts from each of these authors, and we have asked them to check our understanding before we publish the paper. But basically it will share again in a very rich way the different experiences of all the people who participated in that. So we hope to publish that fairly soon and be able to share that. And now I'm just moving the slide on so that Michael can share some final implications from this. And I'll just put them all up there for you, Michael, so that you can read it.
Yeah, last slide, because we don't want to take too much of your time. So this is just some implications of what we've come to kind of call citizen research, to try and get away from those science, social science, humanities boundaries, but that may or may not lie or be a good idea. So first of all, obviously, this kind of approach of involving people involved in citizen research increases diversity, but challenges the existing structures we have in universities and the existing processes. Partly, as I already said about academic publishing, its exclusionary approach and slowness, but also, you know, the way that despite the rhetoric of knowledge exchange, universities still could be better, should we put it that way. The need to increase the kind of spread of this. So citizen research is fairly well established in science, but less so in social sciences, and even less so in humanities, I think. As we've said all along, language and technology are important, not just in the shift towards citizen research possibly, but also whether citizen is the right adjective for whatever this activity is. Some people prefer putting the word participatory in, but that has its other set of connotations and issues. I think this is the third time or fourth time maybe we've said non-academic actors is not a helpful term, and we should probably move away from that. And then also thinking about, well, you know, the nature and the location of the community. Obviously, educational institutions like universities are also part of the community. So the idea of university community partnership is a problematic one. And
Do apologise.
It's taken over. The technology, you see, talk about technology, it never worked for you. So the last two things very quickly, there are opportunities which we think, but then we wouldn't we, because we're interested in this kind of thing, that are opened up by post-digital and post-human perspectives. So some, excuse me, people writing in both of the collective articles that we've done are taking quite, you know, a broadly post-human approach, saying, well, actually, you know, thinking about the citizen component of citizen research as being beyond the human as well, which is interesting and makes you think differently about how collaboration works, how to engage actors in research. And then I don't know if this last bit works, but things have moved on. So we could see HE more as a kind of broker of research and distributor on a Spotify model, where Spotify might be slightly more generous in its remuneration than it is in terms of music, rather than the old-fashioned kind of owner-distributor research like a big company like EMI or that kind of thing. That might be the way things go, but these things are moving so quickly that might be outdated by the time I finish that sentence. I think that's it, isn't it?
I think it probably is. So apologies for moving the slide on, and now I can't move it on at all, I don't think. But it was just yes, the thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we do have some references there that, you know, we're happy to share the slides. I think people have been asking a few things in the chat as well. So I don't know whether we can, would you like to...
I'll come in here, thank you. If you want to unshare so we can see you and our audience as well. That's great. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. Really interesting set of papers and sort of journey you've been on. And you'll offer there's lots to think about in terms of publishing, but also terminology and this this incredibly sort of persistent boundary that seems to continue between the university and its others. Totally agree about non-academic. I mean, that's it's a very sort of negative definition. But I want to, before we have got some questions in the chat, so I will ask Lee and others to come in. But can I just start by just a couple of reflections on your slides? Because at one point you talked about citizen research rather than citizen science, which I got. But it seemed as if you were describing citizen research as many of whom were academics. So is citizen research a topic that academics can engage in, or is a citizen researcher someone who is, yeah, I know, basically, are we coding citizen as someone who is not an academic? So is that another word for non-academic research? Or how are you understanding citizen researcher and citizen research?
It's a hugely interesting question, David, because I think our opinion about this has been changing all of the time as we've been talking with people. And originally, I think, Michael was mentioning our first mapping paper was about citizen science. And then I was particularly thinking, because I'm from a social sciences background, about the more humanities side as well. And then thought, well, we're all citizens actually researching, but there are out there in the community people who do collect data as citizen scientists. Equally, the participants we met in Zagreb, many of them, they'd done their PhDs, they were in and out of universities, but some had their own companies, others had been working in different activist ways with charities or agencies. So I think it's broadened the feeling and understanding for us of this kaleidoscope of people out there that we can't just sit in universities and categorize.
Oh, absolutely. So you're describing, so citizen researchers then are people who don't have academic affiliations, but who are engaged in some sort of knowledge making that they want, that they are happy to describe as research, if that's the. I guess I'm also thinking about research ed, which you may know about in the UK. For those who don't, this is an organization of teachers, which very much describes itself as teacher-led, research that wouldn't want to describe themselves as citizens. They wouldn't describe themselves as teachers, and it's about claiming back research as a prerogative from academic researchers in education, I think. So I wondered whether you want to comment on that in relationship to this as well.
Do you at all, Michael, want to come in? I don't want to.
I think I was going to say the kind of boundaries are quite fluid anyway, because particularly once we got some of the writing that the people who, let's call them citizen researchers for now, and actually written, some of them are connected to universities. They're just not. The difference, I think, is they're not as connected as those of us who have, kind of positions and sometimes titles. So, but that was a conscious decision often. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it's the precarious, contracts, that kind of thing. But often it was a deliberate choice. But it wasn't like I'm a citizen researcher, I'm not based in a university. And I think with research ed and the way that works, there's probably more of a conscious separation.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
We don't want any of that.
That's right. Yes,
but, we're about practice and that kind of, which is fine. And sometimes, again, that boundary is not as fixed as it might be. But it's, I don't know. I mean, I've had a few engagements with research ed over the years. It's quite hard from the academic side to get in as well. And I don't know if that's helpful, but maybe it is. I mean, who am I to say, really?
No, I think that's right. It's a really helpful response, because I mean, it is about why people create walls and boundaries and what's going on there. No, that's really helpful. And as you say, there's lots of different ways of thinking about this. Lee, you had some thoughts in the chat. Do you want to come and ask them?
Sure. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Michael. Actually, if I may, before I ask, the question I put in the chat was actually kind of leaning towards my critical inclinations to ask about social power and things. So just while we're talking about the clarification around your talk, I'm just curious. When we're talking about what who's in and who's out, does it necessitate some kind of is there a threshold for what constitutes as research? Is there a certain method that is necessary? And I'm just thinking about like the way the term research is often used by by lay folk who I have colleagues who I really take umbrage with the use of research by people who don't actually have a method to it, or they're not actually producing some kind of primary knowledge, but they just went on the internet and searched for something, and then they said, I did some research. And so of course, that sharp distinction between that and someone who's producing knowledge in some way. So just curious, like when we're talking about citizen researchers, what qualifies methodologically?
That's a hugely useful question to ask, because it's cropped up a few times in the last few months, and I think it helps add to the complexity, because there will be people who are following some what would you call them, robust research methodologies, and then there will be others who might be part of robust methodologies but are only seeing a small window of that process. So I would absolutely agree. It's not the intention to try to water down or reduce research as such, and any of the ethical side that's needed, any of the, again, to reuse the word robust to show that, we're not just simply, sort of saying, oh, yes, I just did a bit of this or a bit of that, and I didn't ask anyone's permission. So, yes, I mean, it's not a question that's easy to answer, because different groups are different. So there are some people out there, like the people we were working with in Zagreb, who are using methodologies and following processes like we might do in universities. There may well be others who are working on smaller parts of projects, or simply collecting data. But we're asking the question, I think, then, are there ways to make this a bit more inclusive if those people wish to be part of what what they're not seeing, I think. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Lee, do you want to ask anything else?
Well, I do. I mean, I'll defer if others want to go first. Yep.
It's fine, Karen.
Okay, all right. Well, so on the question of power dynamics, you touched on that right towards the end there, as one of the issues, and so that was on my mind throughout, and so I just wanted to ask a little bit about power at the individual and sort of the global or even institutional level. So how do you think about differential power relations as professors from globally dominant HE system, and working with citizen researchers who on the one hand, working with them and partners in other countries, other HE systems that might be less powerful. So on an individual level, do we think about post-digital citizen science as transformative of this unequal relations in some ways? Is it also reproductive at the same time of some of those hierarchies? And then also at the global level, sorry.
No, I was going to say, brilliant questions. Do keep going.
All right. The global level also, are there geopolitical implications to lateral collaborations here that might sidestep some of the hierarchical research approaches, and therefore, are these scalable in some way? Can you have this on a much larger scale than you've done?
All really, really interesting. Can I pick a couple and then see if Michael wants to pick any out that I might have missed there, because that was such a lot of interesting thoughts. On the one about the different contexts more globally, I've always found personally, if I go to another part of the world, that you can only prepare so far, and then in the context you need to actually begin to yourself understand where everybody's coming from, start to work with that culture. You get changed as soon as you arrive from the sort of interactions that you're having with people. I mean, to give one example, some years ago, going to work in Ghana with people that were publishing or we were supporting them to publish, had brought all sorts of concerns about their own local journals to us when we were talking about global journals of importance. And we had the conversation on the very first day about the challenges of the choices people make in different parts of the world in relation to publishing. But I would say that, I mean, that's just one small example of those power dynamics going on, you know, because you know, you need to be able to have those dialogues, and sometimes you need to be in the country and in the context to be able to have them. It's, you know, online doesn't always cut it, does it? So so that was just a couple of thoughts, and I'll see if Michael wants to come in while I think about a few of your other ones.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. What I was going to say is that a couple of the main group of us, the research group on this, kind of leading it, although leading is a problematic term, obviously, in this context, are from New Zealand. And in New Zealand, they have got both, as I said before, maybe a deeper engagement with these citizen research ideas than maybe, or certainly that some of us in the UK have. But also they're very keen to acknowledge the rich history of local, you know, indigenous knowledge, local research, that kind of thing, not being, you know, we're coming along with our Western ideas and universities and telling you what to do. It was very much, you know, the other way around. And I think we kind of learned from that and saying, well, actually, it's about valuing what people are involved in already, and not the point that I think in relation to your previous question about people not feeling just that they're providing data, being kind of data gatherers, and, you know, not being acknowledged as part of a process, which is dangerous. Because I've been, just by chance this week, I've been writing something about pupil voice in schools, how pupil voice in schools is used or not used very well, tokenistically. And the parallels are really striking, that, you know, we go along and talk to kids and say, tell us your views, and then go away again. And it's kind of, there's a danger with particularly with the big citizen science projects, rather than social science or humanities, that happens as well. You know, people are needed to do detailed data collection. It's quite hard to, I mean, it's quite easy then to kind of say, thank you very much. We'll do the analysis now. And we were trying with these collaborative, articles and dialogues to get away from that a little bit, but I acknowledge the power dynamics and differentials are always there.
Great, thank you. These are difficult things, and you're absolutely right to be working and trying to minimize those power relations, even if you can't get rid of them. We've got questions from Adam and a thought from Derek, and also a raised hand from Marion. So if we can take all three, if possible, and then give you a chance to respond collectively. So Adam, do you want to go first?
Oh, well, hi, Michael. Hi, Sarah. So
Yeah.
we kind of sort of know each other, but not really. I've never actually spoken to you directly, so hi, Beth. So it's been great. I sort of cite Sarah's work. I've worked with Michael a little bit as well on the last article. So hi. So I was going to keep the music metaphor going, and you mentioned Spotify and the remix. So in my 500-ish words in the kaleidoscope, I sort of oscillated between public participation through John Dewey and then expertise through Walter Lippmann. So my question around this is kind of the co-production side of things. I think where expertise sits is different in different places. So did you see that happening, rather than this being a totally flat scenario? Different people have different expertise, and that can come together in some way. And taking that to a more macro level in terms of Spotify and that mixtape, I don't think academic publishing has really got there. Maybe the conversation might be close to that, but we've not really got to a space where we had with Spotify, where the record companies fell due to Napster and pirating, and something new came. It doesn't feel like we've got to that. So do you think there will be, and what might that be potentially?
Well, going with your first one, Adam, and thinking a little bit about the different expertise, definitely I would say that we did see that. And you're almost trying to think of different processes for different authors from different sectors sometimes. So if we take the example of Wolverhampton Council, they had presented at one of our events, but they had done really quite a short piece of writing, to which I was piecing together additional parts to that from conversations we've had and things, and then returning it to them, asking them, do they want to make any further input and these kind of things, because you're dealing with very busy people not to say people in universities aren't busy, but you're dealing with very busy people and it's not their chief concern. They may quite like to be in a publication, but there are different, you know, ways to work, and again with people in businesses and things. So I would say that, you know, there were really quite big differences between how Michael and I were working with that edited book with different individuals. Then with the people in Zagreb, again, you were seeing really quite differences both in language. It adds another dimension. You know, some people were speaking fluent English, others not so much. And therefore, you know, when they sent contributions, we were getting shorter ones or longer ones and that kind of thing. Again, you know, music compilation, it's quite fun to, you know, to see that creative side to it. But I might ask Michael if he wants to come in on your second question. Which, yeah.
Thanks for coming as well, Adam. Good to see you here. I think, yeah, it's a good question. I think to a certain extent, the piracy is already here if you know where to look. So I think you can, you know, pretty much you can get hold of anything if you want to. It's not quite as it was with Napster like 20 years ago, but it could, I don't know, maybe because not so many people want academic writing as they wanted music, you know, in 2000 or whatever. But I suppose because we are, you know, because we've done lots of work with the Postdigital Science and Education Journal, Sarah more involved than me, that Peter, who's the editor-in-chief on that, has used lots of different ways of trying to stretch the academic publishing model. So, you know, collective articles, long articles, you know, hundreds of well, dozens of contributors and hundreds of pages, I think. And also trying to use the open access model, you know, collectively, so that if you know, if somebody is linked to an institution where they have open access agreements, then doing it that way, so things are as open access as available. And obviously, you know, encouraging people to share the PDFs of things, although I hate PDFs. So I'm not sure that's the way forward. There must be, the PDFs must die at some point soon. So I think it's kind of bottom up to a certain extent, but it'd be nice in a way, wouldn't it, if the academic publishers got a shock? But we shall see.
I would say that, I mean, from my perspective, interest in publishing, I think it's, you know, the lot you've talked a lot about publishing. It seems to me that the Spotify model is already here in terms of the big platforms sucking up our data. I mean, people now talk about surveillance publishing, and every time you interact with you know, with either a Springer portal or an Elsevier portal, they are making a lot of, you know, our data is being put to good use. So I wouldn't be too romantic about Spotify or about academic platforms either, but that's just my own perspective.
Spotify is evil, obviously, as well.
Derek, you had a comment on post-digital on power relations. Do you want to ask that?
Hello, it's nice to be with you. Thanks for the invitation, Sarah. I'm from South Africa. Adam, it's nice to see you in person as well. We've corresponded before, so it's nice to say how's it. I don't know if I'm a citizen, but I definitely am external to the university. I'm an ed techie who decided to foolishly exit a higher education and now am a gun for hire and work in a range of different situations. But I'm very aware as an ed techie of the asymmetry of power between academics and then the broader digital infrastructures that they're expected to operate in, and how that becomes normalized, but also is a hugely constraining factor as well. Essentially, you're sitting in an environment where data is being collected on you all the time, and you are publishing that data within a big system that works nice and seamlessly, but it's very clear to you it works inside the system. But as a person who's sitting outside trying to access it, and especially here in South Africa, I've got to work darn hard to actually get a voice in. And honestly, and this sounds a bit crazy, but I'm finding doing my research on Wikipedia to being far more satisfying, because I can actually access it. I've got quite a lot of editors who give me some really good feedback, and they allow me to have my voice. Now, Leah, I take your point about it being probably average research, but it's very hard to get into the inner circle when you're kind of excluded. And really, when you're an ed techie, which is just, I mean, yeah, I'm a citizen researcher. I certainly wouldn't call myself ever an academic. I'd be interested to hear your comments.
Thanks ever so much, Derek. I was just going to say how great to meet you, because we only connected this morning on LinkedIn, didn't we? So fantastic that you were able to come along from a link that you probably only received 2 hours ago or something. I noticed your comment in the chat, and I thought that's so important, because it's the silence of some of those infrastructures that's dangerous, isn't it? And the data, it's there in the background, it's taken for granted in too many ways, and therefore you're right, people are having to work to these. They're a different form of framework than the ones we were mentioning earlier, aren't they? The fact that we're being structured by technologies that, I think one of the arguments that many colleagues say to me about that is that the changes it's having all of the time. So, you know, even when they try to teach in ways they want to teach, there's so many things that, you know, barriers they encounter, so many hoops to jump through all of the time, that constantly alters what they're trying to do. So I think those power dynamics and who's putting those structures there and making those choices about them, even on a global scale, and what happened during the pandemic with different companies being able to come into different parts of the world to set up in the name of teaching or in the name of inclusion, but how that's been set up, I think are, you know, they're huge questions to ask, and not ones that I have answers to, but maybe, you know, throw that out again and see. I don't know if you want to comment, Michael, on Derek's points.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, one of the foci we had in the human data interaction book was about kind of data and digital disadvantage, and that was a focus that we kind of didn't follow that through, or we haven't so far, in the kind of citizen research field, where there is that data divide, and, you know, whatever, there's all those divides, aren't there, which is something that we probably need to think about. The other thing that occurred to me, again, using my kind of student pupil, young people voice analogy, is that the citizen researchers, if we want to call them that we've involved, are obviously those that we got to and could be involved and could be connected. The people we, you know, like, as you know, the kids you really want to talk to and get involved and hear their voice are the ones that you can't get to, and it must be the same for citizen researchers as well. So we probably need to think of ways to break through that. There's a lot of boundaries and divides today. We need to break through and break down or remove or whatever. But yeah, it's really important point.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Derek, for joining us, and Adam too. And it sounds like it's been a lovely way for you to meet your co-researchers, Sarah and Michael. Yeah. There was one quick line in the chat, and Marion asked whether she could. She has head off. She said you were mainly talking about bringing people in, publishing with them in outputs. So whether there's an opportunity to create your own record rather than an academic paper, I don't know. But I certainly think that's one thing I would have asked you if we'd had more time, is thinking about non-academic outputs as a way of getting citizen research into the world in genres other than academic. But I think probably for now we ought to stop, because it's gone past 3. Thank you all for coming, and we'll make sure this chat and the whole webinar and the slides are put up tomorrow on our website. And, you know, I hope it's encouraged everyone to think a bit more about the ways in which they conceptualize their relationships with their participants. Come back on next Tuesday, a very different topic, but it's about involving Syrian refugees through online education. And come back every Tuesday, because we're always keen to have a range of different types of webinar here in Central Global Education. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Michael, Sarah, for a great talk. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much, everyone.